If you've ever lain in a bed that cost more than your parents' first house, staring at a ceiling you own outright, unable to sleep because of a number, this story is for you. Not because the story will fix the number, but because it might finally show you why the number was never the problem. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that only the comfortable know. Not the exhaustion of not having enough, the exhaustion of having enough and still feeling the floor tilt beneath you every time you close your eyes. Today, I want to tell you about a wealthy merchant who walked for 3 days to find a monk because he had heard the old man could cure the one thing his fortune couldn't touch. When the merchant finally spoke his question, the monk gave him 7 words in reply. 7 words that undid him. We'll get to those words. But first you need to understand how a man that rich became a man that tired. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, honestly, what's the number in your head right now? The one that, if you reached it, you think the fear would finally stop. You might be surprised how many people typing below you are chasing the exact same ghost. The merchant's name was Devarim, and in the valley where he lived, people said his name the way you'd say the name of weather. Devarim, like a season, like something that simply happened to you if you were lucky enough to do business with him. He owned 3 granaries, a fleet of riverboats, and a house with so many rooms that his own children sometimes got lost finding their way to breakfast. He had begun with nothing. His father had been a rope maker who died owing money to men who were not kind about collecting it, and Devarim had grown up watching his mother apologize to creditors at the door. He had promised himself, somewhere around the age of 9, standing in a doorway listening to that apology, that he would never again be the person on the wrong side of that conversation. And he kept his promise. For 40 years, he kept it so thoroughly that he built an empire out of a 9-year-old's fear. By the time he was 50, Devarim had more grain stored in his warehouses than 3 villages could eat in a year. He had more silver than his accountants could count without losing track and starting over. And yet, every night, when the house went quiet and the servants had banked the fires, Devarim lay awake doing the same arithmetic he had done as a boy in that doorway. Except now, the numbers were enormous, and the fear was exactly the same size it had always been. His wife had stopped asking him what was wrong. His sons had stopped inviting him to walk the fields with them because he would spend the whole walk talking about the price of rice in a province he had never visited. He had, without noticing the exact day it happened, become a man who was rich in every way except the ways that let a person rest. It was his eldest daughter, watching her father's hands shake as he reviewed ledgers by lamplight for the 3rd hour past midnight, who finally said the thing no one else dared say. "Father," she told him, "you are the wealthiest man in this valley, and you sleep worse than the beggar outside the temple gate. Something is wrong with the accounting, and it isn't in your books." Devarim did not answer her, but he did not forget it either. But what he didn't know was that her words would follow him for the next 6 months, into every meeting, into every counted coin, like a smell he couldn't wash off his hands. He tried to reason his way out of it first, the way successful men usually do. He told himself the sleeplessness was simply the price of ambition, that great fortunes were built on the backs of men willing to stay awake worrying while smaller men slept soundly and stayed small. He told himself this so many times that for a while he almost believed it. He hired a physician who prescribed warm milk and fewer hours of work. He hired a second physician who prescribed the opposite, more work, so exhaustion would finally win out over anxiety. Neither worked. He tried giving away small sums to temples and travelers, thinking generosity might loosen something in his chest, and for an evening or 2 it did, before the old tightness crept back in, heavier than before, as if the fear had simply been offended at being interrupted. He even tried counting his blessings out loud, alone in his study, the way a merchant counts inventory. 3 granaries, said aloud to the empty room, a fleet of boats, a house with rooms his children got lost in. He said these things to himself the way another man might recite a prayer, hoping that if he simply listed his fortune often enough, some part of him would finally believe it was real, and finally believe it was enough. But you cannot recite your way into safety. The list only ever reminded him of how much he now had to lose, which is its own kind of arithmetic, and just as sleepless as the first. Notice this, because it will matter for you long after this story ends. The more Devarim accumulated, the more surface area his fear had to work with. A poor man fears for his next meal. A rich man, if he isn't careful, learns to fear for everything he has ever touched. And this is where everything changed. It was his daughter again, the same one who had spoken the uncomfortable truth, who told him about the monk. She had heard of him from a trader who passed through the valley, an old man who lived alone at the edge of the eastern hills, in a hut with no door, who was said to own nothing at all, not a second robe, not a spare bowl, not even a name that anyone still used. The villagers near the hills simply called him the one who stopped. Not stopped working, not stopped thinking, stopped something else, something they couldn't quite name, but that you could apparently see in the man's face the moment you met him. Deverum laughed when he first heard this. What could a man who owned nothing possibly teach a man who owned everything? But that night, lying awake doing his familiar arithmetic, he found himself, for the first time in years, curious about a different kind of number, the number of possessions it would take a person to stop being afraid. The monk's answer, whatever it was, seemed to be 0. Deverum's own answer, after 40 years of trying, still seemed to be infinity. So he went. He told no one but his daughter, dressed in plain clothes so as not to draw attention, and walked for 3 days into hills he had never bothered to visit, even though they bordered land he technically owned. Remember this detail. It matters later. Deverum brought a single bag of silver with him on that journey, hidden beneath his cloak. Not to buy the monk's wisdom, he told himself that would be absurd, but because in 40 years he had never once traveled anywhere without money on his body. The idea of moving through the world unprotected by wealth had simply never occurred to him. He didn't even notice he'd packed it. His hands had done it for him, the way your hand reaches for a lock on a door you've locked 10,000 times before. When he finally found the hut with no door, the monk was sitting outside it in the last hour of daylight, mending a robe that had clearly been mended many times already, in a way that told you the man had made peace with things wearing out. Deverum, exhausted from the climb and from something older than the climb, sat down across from him without ceremony. And here the conflict inside him, which had been building for 6 months, finally reached the surface. He told the old man everything. The granaries, the riverboats, the daughter's words, the sleepless nights that no physician could touch. He spoke for nearly an hour, and the monk simply listened, the way a well listens, without needing to fill the silence. When Deverum finally finished, spent, he asked the question he had walked 3 days to ask. "I have more than any man in this valley," he said. "Tell me, how much is enough? Give me the number, and I will stop." But what he didn't know was that the monk had heard this exact question, in different words, from dozens of wealthy travelers before him, and had learned that the question itself was the wound speaking, not the man. The monk set down the robe he was mending. He looked at Deverum for a long moment, not unkindly, but the way you'd look at someone who had just told you they'd been running for 40 years from a shadow that had never once been chasing them. Then he asked Deverum to open the bag of silver he thought he had hidden beneath his cloak. Deverum flushed, but he opened it. The coins caught the last orange light of evening. The monk asked him a single question. "If I told you that you could keep every coin in your warehouses, but you would never again feel the fear that brought you here, would you take that offer?" "Yes," Deverum said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. And this is where everything changed. The monk smiled, very softly, the way a man smiles when a stranger has just proven his own point for him without realizing it. "Then you already know the fear was never about the coins," the monk said. "It was about something the coins were never going to give you, no matter how many of them you gathered. You've been trying to fill a well with sand." Deverum sat with that in silence as the light dropped lower behind the hills. And when he finally asked the question he had truly come to ask, not how much is enough, but why does nothing ever feel like enough, the monk gave him his answer. 7 words. Slowly, as if each one had a weight the merchant needed time to receive. "You are not chasing money. You're fleeing." Silence settled over the hillside like dusk itself. Deverum did not speak. He sat with those 7 words the way you sit with a bruise you didn't know was there until someone touched it. Fleeing. Not toward anything. Away. Away from a doorway. Away from a 9-year-old boy listening to his mother apologize. Away from a fear so old it had learned to disguise itself as ambition, as diligence, as love for his family, as every respectable word a wealthy man uses to describe what is, underneath, simply running. The monk, did not fill the silence. He let it do its work. That merchant is you every time you refresh your banking app hoping the number will finally make you feel safe, and it doesn't. And you tell yourself that next month's number will be the one that finally does. That merchant is you when you say just a little more for the 10th year in a row, while the fear inside you stays exactly the same size it was when you had nothing at all. Devaram's fortune had grown 100-fold. His fear had not shrunk by a single coin. That is not a coincidence. That is how fear works when it isn't actually about the thing you think it's about. This is the heart of it, and I want to say it plainly, because most people spend their whole lives circling it without ever landing on it. Money anxiety is rarely about money. It is about attachment. The belief that your safety, your worth, your very right to rest depends on something outside of you staying above a certain line. And attachment, by its nature, can never be satisfied by more of the thing it's attached to, because the fear was never mathematical to begin with. You cannot out-earn an identity-level fear. You can only meet it directly, the way Devaram finally had to, sitting on a hillside with a bag of silver open in his lap and nowhere left to run. Sufficiency, the quiet, steady sense that you have enough, was never a number waiting for you to reach it. It is a decision, a posture you take toward your own life, available to you at any income, on any day, the moment you're willing to stop fleeing long enough to feel what you've been running from. So what do you do with this, practically tonight, before the arithmetic starts again in your head? First, tonight, before you sleep, write down 3 things money cannot buy that you already own. Not things you hope to own, things that are already yours right now, tonight, regardless of what your bank balance says. This isn't a gratitude exercise for its own sake. It's evidence, gathered by your own hand, that your worth was never denominated in currency to begin with. Second, name the doorway. Somewhere in your past, like Devaram, there is likely a specific moment when you decided that not enough was dangerous. A memory, a scene, a sentence someone said to you. You don't need to relive it. You only need to name it, even just to yourself, because fear that has been named loses its ability to disguise itself as ambition. Third, choose one small, deliberate act of enough this week. Not recklessness, not abandoning wisdom or planning. Simply one moment where you let yourself act as though you already have sufficient. Buying the good bread without calculating it 3 times, giving something small away without needing it to return to you, closing the banking app after 1 check instead of 4. Small proof, repeated, is how a nervous system finally learns what your mind already knows. Devaram walked back down from those hills 3 days later, and by every outward measure, nothing had changed. He still owned the granaries. He still owned the riverboats. His silver was still exactly where he had left it. But that night, for the first time since he was a boy in a doorway, he slept without doing arithmetic in the dark. Picture him now, years later, an old man himself, sitting on the same porch where his daughter once found the courage to tell him the truth. Watching the sun go down over land he still legally owned but no longer needed the way he once did. There is a particular stillness in a person who has finally stopped running. You can see it in the shoulders before you ever hear it in their voice. And if he could speak to you directly, across all this distance, this is what Devaram would say. I did not become free the day I earned enough. I became free the day I finally asked what I was running from, and stopped running long enough to find out. Because here is the truth this whole story has been carrying toward you. No amount of money was ever going to catch the thing that was chasing you. It isn't behind you, it's inside you. And the moment you turn around to face it is the moment the chase finally ends. Not because you've won, but because you've realized there was never a race to begin with. If this story gave you even one moment of rest tonight, there are more waiting for you here. Next time, I want to tell you about a king who traded his crown for a single night of uninterrupted sleep. And what he asked for in return will surprise you more than you expect. Walk gently, hold loosely,